in this Horizon 2020 Virtual Summit session. We have the pleasure to have Yoram Bar-Ziv, that he is an expert in ERC advanced grants, that is going to talk and give tips and hints on how applicants can be successful in this challenging grant application under Horizon 2020. Yoram, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share the screen with you. As you said, I'm going to discuss today the ERC Advanced Grants. My name is Yoram Bar-Ziv, and I'm an expert in ERC, working with ERC applicants since 2007, when ERC has started. We will start from the top, describing what is the ERC is all about, and try to decipher the code for you when approaching this grant. So, the European Research Council, the ERC, has established this grant in 2007 to be mainly awarded to individual researchers in the academia to promote bottom-up frontier research, which is highly important, and we'll focus on it later on in the presentation. And basically to encourage the work of the established and next generation of independent top research leaders in Europe. There are people that claim that ERC is the platform to nurture the next Nobel Prize laureates in the future. Just an overall overview, technical one, about the types of ERC calls. There are the various types. The three ones has to do with the seniority of the PI, the principal investigators. The starting grant is for the young ones, which are 2 to 7 years after being awarded the PhD. And then there are the consolidator grants, which are the 7 to up to 12 years after being awarded the PhD. And all the rest, the more senior ones, are the advanced grantees, which we'll focus on today. Two other types of ERC grants are the Synergy Grant that was reintroduced now in 2018, which will enable the work of 2 up to 4 PIs together. We will not focus on this grant today. And the last one is the Proof of Concept, which is targeting people that already, researchers that already have an active ERC and would like to extend it with this Proof of Concept grant. It's a limited grant, and we are not going to discuss this in detail today. In this slide, you can also see the budget associated with each one of the categories, the expected duration, the starting, consolidated, and advanced grant are expected to run to up to 60 months, the Synergy grant up to 72 months, and the expected deadlines are listed here below as well. So, what is it all about? Going to the mission statement of the ERC. They're looking for novel and ambitious science. That's always important here. They look for the real breakthroughs. In case there is a project that the major breakthrough was reached already, then maybe it's not good enough for the ERC. We need to keep this in mind. High risk, high gain. They always look for these. Sometimes they say that the high gain is more important, meaning to see that the project may have a lot of impact in all possible dimensions. But when we are trying to look at the competitive phase, we need to keep in mind the high risk. There are high conceptual scientific risk of the project. And these are not just words, this is what actually ERC is looking for. And in many cases, they're looking for hypothesis-driven research. We will look deep into that later on. When you thinking of whether you need to apply to ERC or not, we would recommend to go through a very brief self-assessment and check whether is your concept indeed at the frontier of science. It's very important to think about that. How do you relate to competitors? Are you going to challenge current dogmas? These are all essential aspects that must be addressed in the ERC, and we cannot overlook these.
Yoram, I have one question on that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You know, when we are preparing a proposal, we believe that this proposal is our baby, and we believe that it's the best, the most beautiful baby in the whole world. So, in many cases, I think researchers could fall into the trap that their concept, it is at the frontier of their science because they believe so, because it is their baby and they suffered in order to give birth to that. So do you think that instead of having only a self-assessment will be nice to have a peer assessment also with some other peers that you trust?
First of all, yes, and I agree. Your question is very valid, and definitely sometimes it's hard to evaluate this. Still, we are going to provide some tools later on in this presentation and in our current work of how to do that in more depth. But we put this self-assessment as something as a first step into looking at it. It's not going to stop here. Actually, the full presentation and our full training is addressing all these aspects and providing the tools to see whether they are in par with what ERC is looking for.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Going to the next item is the conceptual versus operational high risk that we need to look for. And here is one very important hint, which may be in line with your previous question. A lot of work as for the description of what a project is about is usually not the type of risk to aim for. Well, ERC can accommodate large projects, which is great and fine. But if it does not carry the conceptual high risk, then it may not meet the requirements of the ERC, which tend to be elusive in that context. We will get more and more details into that.
Okay.
And then we are moving on to the high gain, and we need to show that we are addressing important challenges. And the question that you need to answer is whether this project of yours carry the gain which is high enough. If it is a very limited one, or assuming that you are going just to solve a specific problem and that's it, maybe it's not going to match the ERC criteria. If there is let's say an end point to the project, which no further research is going to be needed after the project, again, this will not meet the ERC criteria. We are looking for high gain, which is going to open the horizon for more research to come after the project. So, looking at the risk, we need to keep in mind that the risk always is something that we need to balance with the feasibility of the project. And this is a classic theme that we see in many projects, because many projects and many applicants are used to apply with projects which are more feasible. Most agencies would like to fund a project which is feasible. In ERC, we need to focus on the high risk while keeping in mind the feasibility balance. So we put a scale here. On the left side, we have the low risk, highly feasible or not ambitious projects that we are aware of for many other agencies. On the right side, we need to mention the too ambitious and the hand-waving way of presenting a project, which may be something that someone that hears about the high risk would try to do. For ERC, we need to be somewhere in the middle between these two ends, definitely not on the left hand and not on the right hand as well.
What do you mean with hand-waving? I'm not aware of this term, sorry.
Hand-waving is something, I'm going to solve the problem of cancer, for example, or I'm going to develop a new drug that will cure diabetes patients, but without providing any evidence that there is a way to go there, or providing any kind of initial steps to support this kind of statement. So we need to be very careful with that.
So you mean that these are in danger to be just claims and not facts? You need to have evidence on that.
That's why we need to balance it with the feasibility. Now, the feasibility should be limited, because in case what the PI is going to present is too feasible, then there might be a question about the high risk. If it's too feasible, then maybe it's not risky. And in that context, our experience over the last 10 years shows that many researchers, advanced, starting, all types of them, find this aspect to be counterintuitive. When they come to write the ERC, it's not what they are used to. It's counterintuitive to what they are used to in other agencies, other funding agencies that provide other grants. So how do we do that? So we give here some hints. It's not the full list. So in order to balance the high risk that we're going to present, we need to show the track record, which provides the capacity of the PI, and some preliminary results. And I put the emphasis on the sum. If you go to too much feasibility, too much results, then the high risk may be diminished. And we need to keep in mind what is the optimal time point where we just see the tip of the iceberg, but we know or we assume that there is much more work to do below the surface, and to portray the full extent of the project, which is hidden at this point when we apply to the ERC.
So the optimal time point from implementation point of view, where that should be more or less?
When the applicant has already the preliminary results, but did not proceed further on, in case there is a breakthrough already, then maybe it's too late. So they need to provide some evidence that that they are going in the right direction, and that they show that they can do something with that. They can reveal something, but it might be not enough, or make sure that it's not too late. That's the balance here. And yes, it is tricky. It's not simple. That's why it's counterintuitive. And this is something that many applicants, especially advanced grants, find it quite difficult with ERC to find this sweet spot of the exact balance.
So the optimal time point should be the point that you have, of course, some evidence of your track record as a principal investigator. At the same time, you have already produced some preliminary results that shows the vision of your suggested ERC advanced grant. And this is the time now that you're submitting this, you're starting preparing this grant application form in order to submit it to the European Commission to get the advanced grant. Is that so?
Yes. And for example, a typical question that we get is maybe we have already published something. If something was published, then it might be a problem for presenting this project to the ERC.
Interesting.
It is something that was not published yet, and of course, and keep in mind the competition, that no one, which is one of none of your competitors, has done anything here in that context.
All right, I see. Is it, I'm not that familiar with the process. Is it a common practice to have a study grant and then to have an advanced grant ERC, or this is not a case?
First of all, typically it would be a starting grant and then consolidated grant and maybe then advanced grant. But the history so far is such that there are many that pass from starting to consolidator, but I doubt that there are many that went through the old chain of starting, consolidator, and advanced, because each project is 5 years, and so far it's 10 years since it started. So I doubt that there is anyone. Maybe the first one would be now.
All right. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next aspect, very important in ERC, is the non-incremental work. And this is again something which is counterintuitive to many applicants. When we're talking about non-incremental work, it means that we need to make sure, this is what ERC is looking for, that it is not something that you are used to do in your daily work as a researcher in your research career. And in order to evaluate this, we listed here a list of questions which I'm going to go through now and give you the sense of how to evaluate this. So how is this project positioned with respect to your past achievements? We need to show here that it's something which constitutes a major leap forward, and it's not something that is the natural next step of your past achievements. How does it relate to the day-to-day work in your research group or lab? Is it another project in the lab, or is it the project of your career? And this is the answer that we want to hear from you when applying to ERC. Is it a time and material project? And here we need to recall the high risk. When we're talking about time and material, it means, I'm going to elaborate it in the next slide, but basically it says, if you get the money and you can allocate the time and the resources, will you get to the solution? Will you reach your targets, your goals? If the answer is yes, then maybe there is no high risk here involved, and we need to evaluate that. We need to try to shy away from this kind of projects. How is it positioned with respect to the state of the art? Also the others, not only your. So it's very important to make sure that we are showing a significant progress beyond the state of the art. Is it new to you or new to the research community? And this is a question that we face in many applicants. Actually, many of them are advanced grants, which is the focus of our presentation now. The right answer here should be it's new to the research community. If it's only new to you, then maybe it's not novel enough for the ERC. Are you the right PI to carry out the project? And here we need to record the competition, making sure that no one else might be in better position to do that compared to you. Do you have the infrastructure and resources to do that, or do you need to invest in that? Because sometimes we get applicants that are referring to this grant as kind of an infrastructure grant, which is not. Will you need significant changes to the infrastructure? And keep in mind that it's not an infrastructure grant, although it will fund anything that you want as long as you meet the ERC criteria of the high risk, high gain, non-incremental steps. But if you are asking for this grant only in order to change your infrastructure and invest in that, ERC will not fund that. Equipment can always be, of course, be purchased by the budget of the ERC. So all these are in order to evaluate the non-incremental work. Moving on to scientific approach, which also has to do with non-incremental work and methodology. So after establishing the concept, the innovative concept of the project, the high risk one, we also need to establish the methodology. And sometimes we need to be to evaluate whether the methodology should be novel as well. And here we need to ask the following questions. First of all, is it a must? Because maybe if we use other methodologies which are which exist already and are popular or relevant to your work, maybe you can do the work as well. So if you are trying to come up with a novel methodology, this might be kind of an overdoing and something that might not be welcomed by the ERC. So we need to make sure whether it's a must and whether it's necessary and appropriate. This is something that the evaluators must address in the report about whether it is necessary and appropriate to the needs of the project. It should be should address the novelty of the concept, but should not be kind of an overkill because you want it also to be novel in your methodology.
So in your opinion, Yoram, if you have a well-proved methodology that has produced, not necessarily in your lab as a principal investigator, some scientific results, but let's say in other research institutions, and you have that methodology, and on the other hand, you have a novel methodology. So according to your view, it is if you believe that a well-proved methodology that has been applied already in a similar context has produced some results, then your advice is to go with that instead of going with a completely new novel methodology on the other hand.
That's correct. That's correct. We always need to evaluate this in depth. I can't give you, it's not a rule of thumb, but you know from experience that in many cases this is the correct case.
Okay.
Okay, next question to evaluate here the scientific approach. Is the methodology development the goal, or is it the scientific question to be asked? Something to evaluate here. Of course, we prefer the latter. And now we're moving on to the time and material projects. This is something that we strongly recommend to avoid, and it's quite typical that many projects actually are being presented as such, and I will explain this in details. Typically, these time and material projects do not carry risk. They simply say, if we get the money, we get the resources, we get the time, we will reach the results. That's it. And we refer to these projects as fishing expeditions. This is quite typical to look at projects which claim that they have data, they have observations, or they will go and do some observations and obtain the data. And when they look deep into that, they will find something. This is great to many other grant agencies. This is not working in ERC. And it's very important in that context. And ERC, there is a claim, of course, it's an unofficial claim, that if a project can be funded elsewhere in other funding agencies, then the ERC will be reluctant to fund it. And that's why we mention it here. And the last thing about this time and material project, which is a very common phenomenon that we face in our work with many applicants, is that people tend to recycle the grant applications. And we strongly recommend not to do that. Do not recycle grants that you have applied to other granting agencies elsewhere. Don't try to do that. In most cases, it's not going to work in ERC, and we will need to start from scratch with a new project to the ERC. Moving on, when presenting a scientific approach, we must show that we have the proven experience and expertise with the chosen methods. The PI has to have the proven experience and expertise. I'm going to talk soon about the issues of collaborations. Collaborations are not welcome in ERC. So in case the expertise or experience is not in the capacity of the PI, then we may have a problem here. And last but not least, we do need to present a solid work plan and justify the request for resources. It's quite limited because the grant application in ERC is rather short. It's not the one that we are used to from the collaborative projects in Horizon 2020, but still we need to present one. So, collaborations in ERC, and here when I'm going to talk about, I'm going to exclude the synergy grant, which is a collaborative project. Just focus on the regular ERCs, of course, including the advanced grant ERC. So, focus is always on the PI, and it's highly important. ERC is not a collaborative project and should not present as such. You should avoid these kind of presentations. Up until 2011, there was an option for the advanced grant applicants to present a co-PI, but since then, it's not allowed. No co-PI, no collaborators in the core project. Now, when we're talking about collaborators, it's important to mention that it doesn't mean the team members. It's perfectly okay to work with your team as the PI, but if you rely on working on external collaborators from elsewhere in the world, this might be a problem in ERC. However, there are exceptions to that. And the main exception to that is that you can collaborate with others when they have an expertise which is needed to your project, and it's complementary, it's peripheral. It's not in the core research project presented to the ERC. And if you're going to have this kind of collaborator, then we strongly recommend to say exactly who is going to be this person and explain why you chose this one. Don't leave it to some kind of a general statement. I will collaborate with someone. Name the person. Explain the full justification. Make sure that it's not perceived as work in the core research in the project. This person can be from anywhere in the world, internal or external, to the the host institution of the PI. And when doing that, a typical question that we get is whether there are going to be some publication restrictions later on during the project execution. So the answer is no, there are no restrictions whatsoever. They can publish together, and this is fine. Another thing to pay attention to is the budget consideration. When you do that, of course, we would like to see a collaborator which does not need a lot of money in the budget, because it may cast a shadow on the PI and the PI's work.
So, just because I missed something, this collaborator shouldn't be a principal investigator, or it can be.
They can be PIs elsewhere in other projects, but not in this project. Not in the PI.
Because you need just one principal investigator, and the others are going to be collaborators or supporters inside your core team or outside your core team.
Correct.
All right. And this collaborator, from his or her profile, even if he's not considered in that ERC project as a principal investigator, from his or her credentials, should be at the same level, inferior to the principal investigator, superior to the principal investigator?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Any type, any category, any type and level, as long as this collaborator does not cast a shadow on the PI, and it's not perceived as the expertise of the collaborator is actually more dominant than the PI's expertise to carry out the project. Both must be on the PI. The PI is in the center.
Can you give us an example? I mean, what the principal investigator expertise should be in one of your cases, and what is a complementary expertise that can be provided by collaborator?
Yeah, let's assume a project that it's in, let's say, in biology, and the PI is going to come from the biology background, and he might need the assistance of a bioinformatics expert, which he does not have on his team. The bioinformatics expert, as long as it's not a core task in the research, can be a collaborator.
All right. Okay. So it has to be, it's better to be in a different domain, I mean, in a different discipline, which means that if you're dealing, as you said, with biology, then probably you need an expert in big data analysis. So that will be a collaborator that will complement that.
Correct.
All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
So moving on to hypothesis in ERC. If you read the full documentation of the ERC, you will not find the word hypothesis mentioned at all in the documentation. However, we know from experience that the reviewers are looking for hypothesis-driven projects, and these are kind of quotes that we put here from various ESRs. ESRs is the evaluation summary reports of applications in the ERC. And as you can see, many reviewers are looking for hypothesis-driven projects. These are quotes from both awarded and rejected applications. It's across the board. Now, we know that there are domains and disciplines which are not used to work with hypotheses, and it's not relevant to all PIs and not all relevant to all disciplines. Still, we emphasize that. We want to push the PIs to come up with a strong hypothesis, and that's why we mention it here, even if it's not the common practice in the work. Sometimes it is expected in ERC, even in these cases. So just to take a very quick look into what they're looking for in hypothesis-driven research. Well, first of all, the definition of that would be a reduction of a scientific problem to operational form, which allows observation, data analysis, and generalization. And here we put on the left side, we put a diagram. It's kind of the circle of life of working with hypotheses. It starts with the big research questions or question. And then based on that, we are going, the PI should propose a hypothesis and narrow it down and zoom in into what they are looking for in the hypothesis, operationalize it, observe, analyze the data from the observations, reach conclusions, and generalize it. It's highly important. And this circle can go on and on. In the context of ERC on the right side, a good hypothesis should enable the advancement of knowledge. And in the context of ERC, it should correspond to the high risk and high gain, be consistent with observations. And in ERC, to establish that, we need to have the preliminary results, which we mentioned earlier on in the context of the high risk, and be conductive to further inquiry. And this is the open end in ERC, which they're looking for further research to be conducted after the project ends. If you're going to change a dogma in your field, then many others will follow later on. This is exactly what they are looking for here as well when looking for hypothesis-driven research.
So, Yoram, this is a very, very interesting slide. And based on what you said before, that we need to be at an optimal time instance, which is the tip of the iceberg. Now, from this cycle here, this optimal time instance, this tip of the iceberg, should be probably narrowed down, zooming in, or when you start the observations. So where this is where you're now, at this point, you are able to submit an ERC advanced grant.
Yeah, well, when you present the ERC grant application, you should be at the level of proposing the hypothesis. And from more, you know, the research questions that are of interest to you, and in the application propose the hypothesis, and then, yes, from this point on, carry out the project.
So you need to have your hypothesis. And as soon as you have your hypothesis, then all the other steps that are mentioned here, these should be the ones that should be part of your methodology in the advanced ERC grant. Narrowing down, zooming in, operationalizing, observing, analyzing data, reaching conclusions, and then generalizing. Yes?
That's correct. What I can tell you from our experience, in many cases, many applicants actually fail to go through the steps of proposing the hypothesis, and they are trying to move, let's say, directly from the research question to the operationalization already. And in ERC, we need to go through the hypothesis in many areas.
So this hypothesis, we can say that this is, in fact, the preliminary results, because we propose some hypotheses, but of course, these hypotheses are not out of space. We have already some research questions that they are based on some evidence, and based on those research questions on some evidence, then we propose some hypotheses, but of course they have the relevant high risk that you have been discussing about. But this should be the preliminary results that we need to have as evidence when we start writing the advanced grant on ERC.
That's correct.
All right.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's very, very, very useful. And I really like this tip, because we don't see that very often, that you need to have some hypothesis on board in your advanced ERC grant application in order this to be some form of evidence, some form of preliminary results to base your further vision in your research. All right, thank you.
I agree. And in fact, because of the limitation of time, we didn't go through the full training session. We have a full training section about how to form an ERC application, including a chapter just on the hypothesis and methodology and how to construct it right to the ERC. But we are not going to get into that now because of the time limitation.
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
Okay, moving on. Next slide. So the focus of this presentation is on the advanced grant applicants. And in that context, this is a very important slide. And this is the focus on the advanced grant applicants. So we need to keep in mind the following. First of all, the advanced grant applicants are always well established. They are experienced. They are very much experienced in obtaining grants, usually other grants. And they're used to rely on working in collaboration with peers. Now, when it comes to ERC, this is the most typical pitfalls that we face when working with these applicants. And it's highly prevalent. We see that all the time with almost all advanced grant applicants. So we're going to go through these items. Presenting a project which is non-incremental. They fail to do that. They are trying to do an incremental step when they are expected to present a project which is non-incremental, because this is what they're used to do.
I know that you highlighted this, we had a slide on non-incremental, but can you a little bit elaborate further what is the difference between incremental and non-incremental project?
Well, this is a bit elusive, but I will try. Let's say that if a project is going to be perceived as something which is the natural next step of the work that was done so far, it would be perceived as incremental.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you present something, you said, the work that I was doing so far is that and that. And now I want to open a new area, and you look into a new direction, which is in line with my track record. Of course, we cannot go and do something which is not in line with what with the track record of the PI, which is dramatically different, dramatically new, dramatically innovative, to the extent that people may say it's impossible to do, or maybe you won't get funded to that in many other agencies. Then it may constitute a non-incremental step.
Okay. So as far as it is not, it should not be a follow-up of something that you're doing. It should be something, let's put something disruptive in research, something that hasn't been done either in your community or in another community, in research community outside your network. All right, I see.
Now, just to emphasize how important and how critical this issue is, we've been working in the past with several Nobel Prize laureates.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they had an amazing track record. And they didn't present a project that was non-incremental, actually relying on the Nobel Prize as the track record.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work because they didn't bring something new, dramatically new. That's how critical this issue is for advanced grant applicants.
Very good.
The next one goes in line with that. It's acknowledging that the risk should indeed be real and high risk. Now, the typical thing that we hear from many applicants, especially the advanced grant, is that, yes, we heard that ERC is looking for the high risk project, but it's not really high. They want something feasible. We know how it works. So the answer, in most cases, there are exceptions to that, but in most cases, the answer is no. They are looking for really high-risk projects. This is what ERC is funding. And the advanced grant the applicants, they are used to work with other agencies that don't look for high-risk projects. So they find it quite difficult to mitigate this gap between presenting something which is really innovative, novel, and carries the high risk.
Do you have an example from your case, something that was real but high risk, and of course it was funded by ERC?
I didn't get the question from the start. Can you repeat the question?
The question is, do you have something as an example from your case or a project that has been funded under an advanced ERC grant that was high risk but pragmatic, real at the same time? Just to understand a little bit the balance between pragmatism and high risk.
That was granted? A project that was granted?
Yes, a project you believe should be suitable for an advanced ERC grant.
As I said, there are exceptions to that, not too many. I can't recall now a good example, but I can tell you that in most cases it's not working.
So probably the advice that we can give to our viewers in that case is to go to the core list database of Horizon 2020 and then have a look on the approved advanced ERC projects and try to identify where was the high risk and what was the reality, the pragmatism, and try to see that balance in order to become a little bit more familiar with this concept.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Next thing is presenting a hypothesis when they are not used to do that. As I mentioned earlier in the previous slide about hypotheses, this is, let's say, it's a more severe issue with the advanced grant applicants compared to the starting and consolidated grant applicants. If they are not used to work with hypotheses, it will be much more difficult for them. And in many cases, we push them because we know it is expected, and it's difficult to work on that. Many of them are working in collaborations with peers, and they are used to that, and they fail to present a project which does not rely on such collaborations, and this is something that has to be changed when applying to ERC. Another issue which corresponds with the next chapter of my presentation is a fresh publication record. When they present the track record, the senior ones, the advanced grant applicants, they are required to present their track record for the last 10 years. But if they do not have publications from the, let's say, the last 1 or 2 years, and it's not fresh, it might be a major problem. So it must be fresh. And last but not least here is that we have to emphasize that they are used to delegate the grant writing to the junior staff members in their team. In ERC, it doesn't work. It's not something to be delegated. They need to do that themselves. It's that high in terms of expectations.
Okay, very good. One question, not on that, but because this is a very good tip, but on the hypothesis. You said that you're running also some trainings on how researchers can build their own hypothesis. Do you have also some tools, some templates that people can have a look in advance to see how we can formulate some hypotheses based on research questions?
No, the answer is no. There are no templates to that because this is, by the way, it's across the board. ERC is a very personal grant, and no ERC resembles the other. There are no formats, no templates. The text in the actual template of ERC, as you can look at the template on the website, is basically an open text. So there are no templates to that. We do teach people how to do that in our courses, but there are no templates to that and nothing that can be studied online for that matter. It's not that simple.
And normally for that kind of training, is it a half a day? I mean, you teach some researchers how to formulate from their own research questions some hypothesis. Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours?
Our training?
Yes, your training, yes.
It's a full training about ERC. It composes typically we have 2 segments. The first one is the main presentation session, which runs for approximately 3.5 hours. And then in the second half, we are having personal meetings with candidates to discuss their ideas for ERC. And we meet them in person to see whether what they have in mind is going to meet the requirements of the ERC or not, and how to improve it. So this is the structure of our training. It includes all the elements, not just the hypothesis, the high risk, high gain, non-incremental, how to construct it, technical issues, everything is included in this training.
Is it split between step 1 and step 2 evaluation? I mean, is it adapted to that, or it is a general one?
It is a general one. I will explain the process of the step 1 and step 2 in a few slides. Okay. But keep in mind that ERC, you submit everything in the first on the same deadline. You don't submit 2 deadlines. It's all in a single deadline, and we are addressing everything in the same training, except for the interview training that has to do with the second step. It's a different training. It's an individual, customized training for those that pass to the interview phase, but it's relevant only to the starting and consolidated grant applicants, not to the advanced grant applicants.
Okay, very good.
Moving on, I will try to move to the next chapter. I'll try to do it briefly. When looking for the ERC candidate profile, this is the thing that we have to keep in mind. We're talking about, first of all, about international visibility. It's very important. We compare here the various categories: the starting grant, consolidated, and the advanced. I'm going to focus only on the advanced one. So we want to show that they are recognized internationally, that they have a lot of invited talks, which are recent, that they have a network of connections, peers, and collaborations in their track record, not in the present project, as we said earlier. Scientific impact, we need to look for the advanced grant into an active 10 years track record. It should be fresh. And we are looking always for high impact publications in the best available journals in the discipline, this relevant discipline of the PI. In that context, we need to mention the H-index vulnerability, which not always gives the right indication for the visibility of the scientific impact of the PI. We need to handle this with care. It's not required by the ERC, but it's commonly used. That's why we mention it here. I'm not going to go deep into that. In our full training, there is a lot of reference to that. Non-incremental work in the track record of the PIs. This is important, especially for the advanced grant. We need to show that in the track record, they always went for non-incremental work, or they had some non-incremental work in their track record. It's very important. It's an evidence to their quality as researchers. And in advanced grant applicants, this is also a common issue that we face, that they do not have enough non-incremental steps or work in their past track record. They don't have major breakthroughs in the past track record. Funding ID. So this is where we present the track record in obtaining other grants, no matter which grant, any grant. We just want to show that they are used to that, they know how to do that, that they have managed to secure funds in the past to carry out the various projects. And for the advanced grant applicants, in most domains, this is a critical issue. If they don't have it, if they don't have enough of that, which is recent, active, from the last few years, it might be a critical issue. Interdisciplinarity, this is well encouraged by the ERC, but only when it's well justified in the track record and of course also for the project, and it's not a must. It's very important to remember that this is mentioned in the mission statement, but it's not a must in the ERC. Moving on, career discipline shifts. This is less probable, but sometimes we get to see that. It is possible to fund a career or discipline shift in the career of the PIs. It's less probable to the advanced grant, and we do not recommend them usually to do that. Leading a research team and mentoring young scientists. This is critical. If the advanced grant applicant does not have it, it might be a problem. Moving on. Point in time career-wise, when looking at the profile. So in order to evaluate whether it's the right point in time from the career-wise, we need to look into the publication status, as mentioned earlier. And sometimes there are personal considerations that we need to take into account. In terms of concept-wise, and this is very important in the profile of the PI and the suggested project to the ERC, we need to make sure that they strike the iron while it's hot, meaning it should be the right spot, as mentioned earlier about the high risk. Make sure that you are ahead of the competition. Consider whether will it be too late next year. Do you have convincing preliminary findings? Is it mature enough on the other hand? Do you have any pending publications that might lower the high risk that is expected? These are all things to evaluate here, whether it's the right point in terms of concept. And all these lead to a very important question that should be asked when you evaluate whether the project meets the ERC criteria or not, and the evaluators are going to ask the same question themselves. Why me? Why now? Why this PI should apply with this grant, this project at this point in time? This is very important thing that we need to convince with when applying to ERC. Okay.
Why now? I like this. That's very good. And can we add also why me? Why now? Why this?
Yeah, but here I was referring to the profile.
The ERC calendar profile. Just one thing on the ERC calendar profile. Does it affect the number of citations of the publications of the PI, of the principal investigator? The more citations in highly impactful publications, the better it is. Is that the case?
Yes, definitely. That's what I refer to the publication status. Yes, definitely.
Is it related to the age index vulnerability, or this is something else?
Age index is a way to, it's a very inaccurate way to evaluate the performance of the PI in terms of citations, and in which journals, on the other hand, on time and specific time scale. Okay. And it's very inaccurate, so should be handled with care.
All right. Okay.
But definitely the presence, the performance of the PI is highly important in ERC.
Thank you.
Okay. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Moving on to the evaluation panel selection. This is very important because the ERC is a bottom-up grant. And in order to do that, they put a system in place which is based on peer review evaluation panels. We put some examples here on the slide. They are divided into 3 pillars: the PE, the physical and exact sciences on the left; in the middle is the LS, the life sciences; and on the right is the SH, the social sciences and humanities. And when applying to that, the PI should find the right panel to apply to. You need to keep in mind that in the process, keep in mind that the panels are given. We cannot change that. There are slight differences between one year to the other. Need to check always to check the current work program to see the exact panel's definition. In many cases, it's a straightforward decision to make which panel to apply to, but not always. And this is not always when we come to interdisciplinary projects. And sometimes when we present novel disciplines or niches which are not well covered by the multiple panels that we have already. So it is something to pay attention to. I'm not going to go deep into that. This is another thing that we elaborate in our full training. However, what you need to keep in mind is the reciprocal effect of writing the proposal and the selection of panels. And you need to think of and decide what leads what. It's the panel or the proposal, because you want to write the proposal to the people that are going to evaluate it. And when doing that, keep the reviewer's background in mind. This is something that you need to look deep into that. Again, I'm not going to elaborate about it now, and we'll address it in full details in our training. That's about the panel selection. Now, sometimes there is an issue that ERC applicants are in a situation where we need to consider an alternative, which is the FET Open, the Future and Emerging Technologies Open Call. I'm going to briefly explain it now. We have another session about the FET Open, another session, but just to explain that. So first of all, the FET is the Future and Emerging Technologies Call. It's a collaborative project setting the baseline for a radically new line of technology and its future uses by establishing its proof of principle and foundational scientific underpinning. Now, we mentioned this because there are a lot of things which are common between FET Open and ERC. First of all, they are in the same pillar of the Horizon 2020, the excellence pillar, and derived from that, and this is the key thing to remember here, is that since 2015, the evaluation of the FET Open has changed, and now they're using a similar review panel system to the ERC. They actually copied the system from the ERC. There are variations over there, but when addressing the FET Open, it's very important to keep that in mind. You need to refer to your project when presenting to it as it was an ERC. This is that important. Another thing which is common is the bottom-up approach, meaning everything can go there in all disciplines. They're looking for radically novel ideas, and the high risk is evaluated in FET Open now as in ERC, using the very same tools. That's why we mentioned it here as an alternative. How is it different? Of course, there is no single PI. It's a regular collaborative project like in the Horizon 2020, looking for collaborative work, 4 to 8 partners, roughly speaking. The proof of concept should be within 3 to 4 years. You should present a project that can reach a proof of concept within 3 to 4 years, unlike in ERC. It is limited to technology-based projects, and the budget is around 3 million euros. Just to wrap this part up, we present this scale of the Horizon 2020, the TRL technology readiness level at the bottom, spanning from basic research to market, when the majority of the Horizon 2020 is in the middle, the top bottom themes, and on the left, we can see that there is kind of an overlap between the ERC and the FET Open. And that's why we mention it here. It's an alternative to some of the applicants.
This is your own, because this is a very interesting slide. I mean, to show the relationship between the different Horizon 2020 programs and actions and the technology readiness level. Is this something based on your own experience? Because it's very interesting, this slide.
Yes, correct. This is our slide based on our experience. This is, again, part of our full training. I didn't get here into more details now. Just wanted to demonstrate the overlap between ERC and FET. Actually, ERC should be even located more further to the left, around the TRL1, the basic principles, and even further to the left beyond that, because it's that basic. However, FET Open is located around TRL2 and 3, and there are overlaps between them. We have a lot of experience in working in parallel with ERC and FET Open and shifting projects between ERC and FET Open and the other way around, because of these overlaps. Okay, moving on. So technically speaking, and this is the last chapter of this presentation, keeping in mind the ERC evaluation process. So first of all, I mentioned it earlier, it is a 2-step evaluation process, but you submit everything in a single submission at the beginning. B1 and B2, these are the parts of the application, and you select the panel on the same time on the deadline of the ERC. And then the process goes like that. It moves into the step 1 of the evaluation, where the B1 part is being evaluated, and then they decide whether to pass it to the second step. And if it moves to the second step, there is step 2A, where the B2 is being evaluated. And only for the starting and consolidator applicants, there is a step 2B, which there is the personal interview in Brussels. It's not relevant to the advanced grant applicants. And then we move to the final score. Now, this section, the full process, is being handled by the panel members, the review panel members. However, the B2 evaluation in the second step is being evaluated also by the external reviewers. And we can say that nowadays, successful ERC applications are being evaluated by, at the end, are being evaluated by 10 to 12 reviewers. It's a lot of people to convince that the project meets the ERC requirements, and you need to convince most of them, and sometimes all of them, all of these 10 to 12 people. It's that competitive.
So you submit the proposal, the whole proposal at the deadline, by the deadline, and then only the first part is evaluated by the panel members. If it passes step 1, then we will have B2 section evaluated by panel members as well as by external reviewers. And then in the advanced grant, we have the final score. In case it is a static grant or consolidated, then we have also the interview. All right. All right. Very good. Thank you. Let's proceed.
Okay, so just to explain something more here is about the ranks, the final score of the process. So step 1, the options of step 1 is A, B, or C as final decision of step 1. If you get A, the application, it means that in the process of the evaluation, it moves to the second step, which is great. However, if it fails to pass on step 1, it may get B or C. Now, in that context, we need to know the following. There is a locking periods associated with these final scores. A locking period means that the applicant cannot apply in the next deadlines, in the next calls of ERC, because they don't want these applicants to retry their applications year after year. So if you get B, it's a 1 locking period. If you get C, it's a 2 locking periods. And the locking is personal. You cannot change the project and apply again. The locking is on the PI, not the project. Now, project that moved to step 2, in case it's starting or consolidator grant applicants, then they will go through personal interviews, and then the options are getting scores A or B. The good one, of course, is A, which means funded if sufficient funds are available, of course. And B means failed, did not get funded, but there is no locking period associated with B in the second step.
How many months is normally locking period?
Sorry, again?
How many months is normally a locking period?
Typically a year, 1 year.
So if you have 2 locking periods, that means for 2 years, this principal investigator cannot submit an ERC grant.
Correct. It needs to wait for 3 years.
All right. But as you mentioned, it's not a good practice to resubmit proposals, because I don't know whether this is something that you advise. If there is a step 1 evaluation and you receive either B or C, and no matter if you have a locking period, irrespectively of that, maybe it's not a good practice to resubmit. Maybe it's good to focus on something else.
Yes, and yes, this is another chapter that I'm not going to look deep into in this session, but we have it in our full training. There are things that should be revisited if you decide to resubmit. If you want to apply with something else, then we need to start from the top. But yes, resubmitting is an issue. You do not do that automatically, that's for sure.
Okay. And any comments on the success rate from step 1 to step 2 and from step 2 to funding?
We don't have the exact one from step 1 to step 2. It's a bit complex to calculate it, but what I can tell you about our success rate is the following. The overall success rate for the EU in the recent years is around 12 to 13% across the board. We typically manage to reach a success rate which is double to 3 times that number. The last one was 38% in the starting grant of 2017.
Very good. Very good.
Okay, to end this slide, the evaluation summary report is something that everybody gets at the end, and they can learn from that about what happened in the evaluation process and what they need to conclude from that. Okay, our concluding remarks. So just keep in mind these always. ERC is very unique. It's very hard to compare it to many other grants. We have the experience of many other grants. It's not the same, it's very different. And dedicated awareness and training are key to success. ERC writing demands substantial time dedication. And it's not a matter of the actual writing, it's the forming the concept, understanding what exactly you want to apply with. Now, we typically say that it takes 2 to 3 months before the deadline to mature enough, but sometimes it takes furthermore. And we have applicants that actually took half a year or even a year to establish their concept to the ERC, which is perfectly fine. This is the time that you should dedicate at the end to apply to ERC. No application is identical. We strongly recommend not to try and copy from others. It's not like the regular collaborative projects when we can copy elements or being inspired or trying to mimic a specific structure or not. Don't do that. ERC should reflect your inner voice as a researcher, and there is no way around that. You need to do that. And consult with peers that have ERC. That's for sure. Either they got an ERC if they are panel members or professionals. What we recommend here is to try to avoid or be careful when consulting with people they may be as senior as possible, but they may not have the ERC experience. Be very careful there, because they may give you the wrong advice. Keep in mind the counterintuitive issue. This is where they fail. They will give you the advice that will fail you. And that's why we highlight it here. And by that, I will wrap up. I will just mention here, if you have, of course, further questions, I will be happy to take them now. And here, I'm going to mention my colleagues here. We are split into 3 pillars, like the pillars of the ERC. I'm taking care of the physical and exact sciences areas. My colleague Yasmin Vax is taking care of the life sciences areas, and Sharon alone is taking care of the social sciences and humanities. And thank you for the opportunity to present this.
Wow, Yoram, that was very interesting presentation, very interesting training. You give a lot of tips and hints, what we need to avoid, what we need to give emphasis. I really liked the way that you presented things, and of course we learned a lot of things, but for some deeper familiarization and some ad hoc customized support on an ERC potential advanced grant idea, they can contact you for some further help and exploit your services.
And by the way, the presentation will be available for download.
Excellent. Excellent. That will be what I suggest is also on the presentation. I haven't seen that. Maybe you have it, to have your contact details, either of these 3 people or the contact details of the website. It will be interesting. We encourage to have that, because we would like to have a dialogue, our viewers, with the trainers. So if they have also some further questions, or if they require some further of your services, they can contact you directly, or through our private Facebook group that we will have. But most of the trainers will be there with the viewers, the trainees. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we exceeded a little bit the time allocated, but I'm sure that you enjoyed it as much as I did, because we learned from Yoram some really useful tips and hints. And for some further questions that you might have, you can contact them directly, or try to have join the private Facebook group that we have for that kind of purpose. Thank you for that. Thank you, Yoram, for your excellent training and presentation.
Thank you very much.